Hey everyone, we have a new Chess World Cup winner, which is former world champion Magnus Carlsen. Now, the title Chess World Cup is a bit misleading because the winner and actually the top three players don't become world champions, but they earn the right to play in a candidates tournament where the winner of this candidates tournament would challenge current world champion Ding Liren. And actually, Magnus Carlsen is unlikely to play in the candidates tournament.
No, I mean, I would say under the current format, there is absolutely no chance. So I think everybody should just operate under the assumption that I will not play the candidates, and that everybody else who's in the semifinal is qualified for the candidates.
But nevertheless, let's see some nice games played by Magnus Carlsen in the recently finished Chess World Cup 2023. This was a knockout event, and in the second round, Magnus was playing against a relatively unknown player, but still a strong grandmaster, and in this position we have what looks like a mess. Black is a pawn up, but Black's king on f8 is not sitting very well, not to mention the rook here, which is very passive. But on the other hand, this position is very concrete because Black is attacking the knight on f5 and the bishop on c7. And here actually Magnus could have played even a quiet move like moving the bishop, because this knight on d4 is actually pinned. White would capture the rook on d7 if the knight moves. But Magnus found a very brilliant way to finish the game, a very forcing one, which is rook to e8. And here Black, who is a very strong player, resigned. The point is that after the forced king takes e8, Black's king is having a problem on the 8th rank, because after queen to e4, White is given a check, and also threatening to give a checkmate after queen to e8. So here, Black has to block the check. It doesn't matter how Black goes. The nicest way in which the game could have finished was knight to e6, and after queen to a8, the king cannot go to e7, and if Black blocks the check, for example with the knight, here we have a very nice queen sacrifice. After queen takes d8, rook takes, and rook takes, we get a very nice checkmate. So this was a knockout event in which two players would meet and play two games with long classical time controls, and if the match was drawn, then they would move on to play games with faster time controls. And in round 4, Magnus Carlsen was on the verge of being eliminated. He lost his first game against the German prodigy Vincent Keimer, so he was in a must-win situation in the second classical game. And in this position, it actually looks very hard for White to win, but here we'll see Magnus at his best, playing the ending very accurately, inviting his opponent to go wrong. So here in this position, White is a pawn down, but White is more active, and this pawn a4 is an outside pawn that can advance very quickly, as opposed to this pawn on b3, which is very well controlled by the king on b2. So here after a5, White has the idea to go a6 and just push the pawn, and here Keimer defended very well for a few moves. First played rook to b4, Black has to give the pawn in order to bring the rook to a4, and after bishop to d2, rook to a4, White got the pawn back, but we have very few pieces and bishops of opposite color, so Black has very good drawing chances. Here after bishop to d1, king to c3, Black played the move c6. White doesn't want to capture the pawn because this very strong pass pawn will fall. That's why here Magnus played king to d4, correctly activating the king. And after bishop to f3, Magnus improved his bishop. This bishop might attack the pawn on g7 in the future. And this position should normally be a draw with correct play, but Magnus is very good at putting pressure. And here Keimer made the decisive mistake, which was very difficult to see that this move would end the game. Here he played bishop to g2. The point is that the bishop on g2 is not doing anything. The best way for Black to hold the game was bishop to e2. Even though this move might be hard to find, it follows a main principle in endings, which is just to attack pawns. So here the bishop is eyeing both pawns, so it is very hard for White to progress. For example, after rook takes, now Black might activate the king by going king to f7. And even if White gives a check, for example, this would activate the king. And now Black has pressure on h5, c4, and the rook is also controlling the pawn a5. So this position would offer Black very good drawing chances. But instead, Keimer played the move bishop to g2, and additionally now White found a very instructive way to improve his position by going rook to f5. This limits the bishop on g2, and now White has this idea to bring the rook to f4, and after bishop to e6, activate the king further, and this position is already very bad for black. So the game ended after a few moves. Now white's main idea will be to push the a-pawn. And after a7, rook to e8, here Magnus played this nice move, rook to e4. If the rook captures on e4, then white would simply promote. And after rook to a8, rook to e7, here Khmer played c5, and now white can take on g7, but rook to b7 is also very strong. Now rook to b8 is a big threat, and black is in no time to defend the rook, for example with bishop to g2, because after rook takes g7, white wins a bishop. So after rook to b7, Khmer resigned, so Magnus managed to draw the match and then win in the rapid tiebreak. And the last instructive game I want to show is actually a game from the finals. Here he was playing against Ramesh Babu Pragnananda, also known as Prag, a very strong Indian prodigy. And this was the first game of the tiebreak that Magnus won, and then after drawing the next game, Magnus became the winner of the World Cup. And this again looks like a fairly dull position, where Magnus slowly but surely outplays his opponent. So here in this position, black played the move g4, which as we see was not a very good idea. White has a fairly passive position, but here waiting was probably the best way to go, for example king to g1. The main point is that this bishop on c2 is actually blocked by some pawns, so black has a slightly better position, but g4 doesn't improve white's position. It also weakens this square. As we see, this is going to be a very important square for black's knights. And here after f6, rook to g2, Magnus played knight to h6, and after g5, pawn takes and rook takes. White is not achieving anything. Knight to f7, rook to g2, rook to e6. Here Magnus simply traded a pair of rooks by going rook to f6, and after rook takes and knight takes, we still have material equality, but black has a preferable position. So here Prag played b4, trying to get some activity on the queen side, and after pawn takes and pawn takes, king to f8, we got some maneuvering. Prag actually defended very well for a long time. Basically he made one mistake in the game, which is enough for Magnus to win a game. And after king to g2, king to e7, a5, rook to h8, activating rook, we got some maneuvering, rook to e2, knight to h5. Now we see how this knight can get to f4, so we see a drawback of the move g4, king to g1, knight to f4, rook to d2, rook to h3. So Magnus slowly improved his position, whereas white's position didn't change a lot. And in this position, which is extremely hard to play as white, white has to be careful about rook to c3. The main idea is to attack the knight on c4, which is putting pressure on e5. So after this knight moves, this would free the knight on f7 to go to g5, where it can land to f3, or even go to d6. So this is the main idea that Magnus has in this position, to go rook to c3. So having this idea in mind, white had a very difficult defense, which is bishop to d1. So the idea is to go rook to c2 after rook to c3. Even in this position, white has to be careful, but this was white's best try. Instead, Prag did something which is very natural. After being under pressure, we want to play actively to counterattack. So he went a6, and after pawn takes a6, bishop to a4, activating bishop. But now Magnus played his main idea, rook to c3. And here Prag played the move knight to a5, which as we'll see is not a good idea. Again here Prag had to try rook to c2, but this position is still already quite bad for white, because here black can go rook to f3 and then have this idea of going knight to g5, attacking white's king as it happened in the game. Because after knight to a5, even though white is gonna get a pawn here, black has this idea of attacking the king with a rook and two knights, which is more than enough to give a checkmate. Here knight to f3 also gives a fork, so this position is already quite bad for white. After rook to c2, Magnus first gave a check, and after king to f1, rook to a3, Prag took on c6 with the check, but after king to f6, we have equal material, but white will lose material shortly at best, because here white has the idea to either take the bishop or go rook to a1, giving a checkmate. So this was an amazing performance by Magnus Carlsen. It is the first time that he wins the FIDE World Cup. I hope that you enjoyed the games. If you did, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. This will help me a lot. Anyways, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.